Hello, welcome back to my channel. So with today being the Trans Day of Visibility, I figured I should probably talk a little bit about, my whole gender questioning thing. Um, to answer the obvious questions first, I have not yet changed my pronouns. I'm still using he/him pronouns. That'll probably change in the future. I haven't started any hormones yet. Not sure when I will. Probably, I'm leaning towards starting them relatively soon. I do want to start them fairly soon. Um, for my name, I still go by James, but, you know, obviously you can call me whatever you want. Um, yeah, those seem like the most obvious questions that I keep getting asked a lot. For right now, I don't really have a whole lot actually planned. Like, I haven't really thought that far into what I'm going to be doing. Uh, but as it goes, I will share my journey as I go along it. So as I make decisions, I'll talk about them on the YouTube and maybe on the Twitter as well. Um, so yeah, Trans Day of Visibility. So this is the day of the year where they're vulnerable. You make sure to target their weak points. Yeah, it's you gotta they're invisible the rest of the year. So this is the your one chance. This is the easiest chance if you're gonna get. Joking. Um, I do appreciate the support that I have gotten. Um, as for the people who have been trying to troll me about it, whatever. Though that I don't give a shit about. The people who've told me to 41% myself. Yeah, you're a real badass there. Yeah, real clever and original insult. And obviously, this is a day where a lot of trans people will go out and talk about themselves, talk about what they're talk about their experiences, talk about how they live their lives, that sort of thing. A lot of it is meant as a day of celebration, but in recent years, and this year in particular, it's also a day of rebellion. Yeah, today fighting back. It's a day where it's worthwhile to take a look at just all the attacks that are going on trans people and trans rights uh, all around the world. Obviously, I will say I'm really happy to live in Canada. Obviously, we have our share of turfs. Um, no question about that. But I'm honestly not worried about there being any any legislation that's going to be debated anytime soon, or have any chance of passing anytime soon, uh, that's going to try to attack trans people, try to limit their rights or anything like that. There's a lot of countries where that's not the case, but in Canada, I do feel really lucky to live in a country that is largely accepting. That is that does try to make it fairly simple and straightforward to live as a trans person. Um, I heard something about hormones being free in Canada, which is pretty amazing. Uh, so yeah, I'm really, really glad to live in Canada because it does make things so much easier, so much less scary, uh, so much less frustrating. Even obviously the U.S. hatred has always been a big thing there. Hatred of any group that isn't part of the in group, by which I mean cishet white men. But in the UK, Turf Island, as it's come to be known, it's wild just how much transphobic shit I hear out of the UK. And I'm kind of alarming. Because, I mean, you know, I'm half Scottish and I'm very proud of my heritage. And, I'd love to get back to Scotland one of these years. I do really, really, really want to go back to Scotland for vacation. And, don't like being uncertain of how I would be treated there, um, depending how far along my transition I am at that point. It's concerning. Cause the UK there's just so many. Actually, no, it's not even a large number of transphobes. It's just they're very, 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 very loud. Um, and then obviously the US has tons and tons and tons of anti-trans bills uh, being passed all around the country. Canada, not so much, which is very. Oh, doesn't actually look. Yeah, I mean, quick look, and I'm not seeing anything. We recently banned conversion therapy, which is phenomenal. So yeah, Canada's doing pretty okay. So I'm really happy about that. While I'm here, I do want to talk about transphobia. So, from what I have observed, there's sort of four types of transphobia. There's just the blatant raving transphobes, the people who tell trans people to kill themselves and call them mentally ill, and you know the people who are just out and out hateful. That's the first group, and that's that group is obvious. Um, there's another group who are probably the most insidious. So there's the scholarly types, the ones who will actually talk about transition being life-saving treatment. Um, but who talk a lot more about, the trans movement going too far, and it's being pushed a little too much. These people are just asking questions. They're just asking questions. Jesse Singal is a prime example of this, because credit where it's due, Jesse Singal has, uh, does acknowledge that transition is life saving care, and that even youth transition is life saving care. Uh, and his he uses those acknowledgments to deflect any accusations of transphobia. But he writes a lot, a lot, a lot about, is it going too far? Are hormones being overprescribed? Is gender dysphoria being overdiagnosed? Are kids being pushed into it? He's really, and the thing is, what he refuses to take accountability for is that his articles are used by people who want to push a very hard anti-trans agenda. He refuses to acknowledge that the people who want to just pass total, complete, 100% bans on any sort of uh, transition care for trans youth. They'll use his articles to justify it. They'll quote him, and he refuses to acknowledge that. And I mean, he'll sure as hell correct anyone who tries to say he's transphobic. Like, he will absolutely jump to his own defense when anyone tries to use his words, or whenever anyone tries to argue that his articles push a transphobic agenda. He'll always be, "Oh, where did I say that? Oh, quote me the article where I said that. Where I said that. Quote the paragraph." Like, he'll always jump to his own defense, but he'll never actually criticize transphobes. He has absolutely nothing to say to people who are actually trying to push anti-trans bills and agendas. He has no criticism for them at all. Um, and I mean, there are others like him. That is probably the smallest set of TERFs, because most TERFs kind of don't want to acknowledge that transition is life-saving care. So yeah, there's a third group that's sort of split in half. The third group is the largest group, and that's the people who, oh, I have nothing against trans people. I'm just looking out for women's safety. And it's bullshit. I started to split that into two subgroups. There's the group who are generally pretty benign about it. Well, don't want to say benign, but the people who typically don't engage in deliberate misgendering There's people who typically don't engage in deliberate misgendering, and there's the group who does. This is something that comes up. We'll use the sports debate as an example. Anytime a trans woman is competing in women's division of any sport, you get articles about it. And if you look through the articles, you'll see some TERFs who are like, who are just, doing the whole, I support trans people, but there are biological differences, seems unfair, body mass, height, muscle mass, bone density, whatever. People who are trying to, are trying to make what they see as reasoned arguments. And I mean, maybe they are reasoned. I mean, fine, they're reasonable arguments. There's cases to be made. I'm not looking to get into an actual debate about it, but fine. They have reasonable arguments about it. And then, the people who support allowing trans people to compete, they have reasonable arguments as well, which the TERFs will never acknowledge. But yeah, so you've got the people who are trying to raise a reasonable arguments. And then you've got the people who in other circumstances will say, oh, I totally support trans people. Be who you want to be. Dress how you want to dress. Be who you want to be. But the mask comes off real fast in a lot of cases. So they'll talk about men invading women's sports. They'll talk about, it's, but why not just get rid of the women's division because men are going to dominate this now. They just go straight to refusing to acknowledge that trans women are women. They just go like, nope, they're men. Trans women are men. They go to the misgendering. Another good and yeah, like I said, I'm not actually interested in getting into an actual debate over that, over the trans women in sport. I will note this. Trans people make up a tiny percentage of the population. The number of trans women who are going to be interested in athletics is going to be, a smaller portion of the overall population of trans women. Of that subgroup, only a very small number are actually going to be capable of competing in any sort of competitive level. Trans women are not going to be taking over women's sports. They will always be a tiny, tiny, tiny number of the actual competition. As for the idea of men transitioning just so that they can compete, no, they won't. And it's just not going to happen because transition is not an easy thing to go through. Anyone who's trying to fake being a woman will probably find out pretty quickly that is just not worth it for them. So, fine. Reasonable arguments. There are reasonable arguments regarding the fairness of trans women competing in women's divisions. Fine. Don't pretend like it's something that's going to be a threat to women's sports as a whole. It's not. there will never be a large number of trans women competing in any sport on any significant level. It just doesn't happen. Uh, but let's move on to another thing. Women's shelters. And this is another case where reasonable arguments really end up being a cover for hating trans women. The argument for keeping trans women out of women's shelters is, it might be triggering for the women there to, be living with someone who is male-bodied, as the TERFs would put it, to avoid getting banned from Twitter for calling them men. So yeah, they might be uncomfortable having someone there who is assigned male at birth. Thing is, the people making that argument, they want sympathy for the women. And obviously the women deserve sympathy. They're escaping some pretty shitty circumstances. If you're at a women's shelter, odds are things are not going great for you at that moment in your life. So absolutely, they deserve sympathy. If a trans woman is going to a woman's shelter, odds are things are not going great in her life at that moment. Where's her sympathy? The TERFs don't want to show any sympathy to those women. Where is that woman supposed to go? If she lives in a large enough city, odds are there will be shelters that are, exclusively for queer people that will take her in. But depending on the city she lives in, that might not be an option. Even if it is, she might not be in a position where she can Google trans-friendly shelters conveniently, If she's living with an abusive husband and she escapes and she runs away in the middle of the night, she can't exactly go to the library to ask for directions to somewhere that'll take her in. She probably already knows where a woman's shelter is. So she goes there because she is an abused woman who's trying to escape her abuser. And she gets there, and in the mind of the TERFs, the correct response to a trans woman showing up is, I know that you're escaping an abusive situation, but we have to operate under the assumption that you are probably an abuser yourself, so go away. They think that's the compassionate approach. TERFs think that is what should be happening. That a trans woman who is probably escaping an abusive situation has to be treated as a potential abuser. She gets no sympathy. The trans woman gets no sympathy from the TERFs in this situation. They don't give a shit what happens to her. They don't give a shit if she ends up alone on the streets. It doesn't matter to them at all. Because for a lot of them, as far as they're concerned, well, hey, that's a male problem. That's a men's problem. You men should be taking better care of yourself, taking better care of each other. Trans women escaping an abusive household. Well, why aren't you men looking after each other? Because they still see trans women as men. And by the way, remember that they don't want trans women there because as far as these TERFs are concerned, the argument that they're making, if you take it to its logical conclusion, is that it is reasonable to treat all men as potential sexual predators. And hey, maybe it is. Not going to blame women for that. There's a lot of men are sexual abusers. Not going to blame them for wanting to be safe. That said, I really don't think that most of them view all men as potential sexual predators. I think they view. I think their take is that most men are safe to be around. And there are some women who absolutely are worried about being around any man because their experiences have led them to fear that even men who seem safe can be dangerous. Because there's a lot of safe-seeming men who are. Yeah. So yeah, the turf argument is that all men are potential predators. So when they talk about, why aren't men looking after each other? Like when they reject trans women being allowed into women's spaces, what they're saying is that as far as they're concerned, they don't really care if trans women get assaulted. If you extend their line of thinking, that's what it comes down to. We can't let trans women into women's restrooms because men might go in there to assault women. So instead, we'll push trans women into men's restrooms so that they can be potential victims of sexual assault. They never think that part through. On a side note, their biological imperativism, their view that the sex you're assigned at birth is what you are for your entire life, means that by their reasoning, trans men should be using women's restrooms. So, TERFs are actually arguing in favor of men in women's restrooms. And it's not like it'd be difficult for a sexual predator to be like, oh no, I'm a trans man. I was assigned female at birth. Clearly I'm a woman, right? In their eyes. Of course, TERFs tend to forget that trans men even exist, except to claim that trans men are actually just confused women who were, brainwashed by the patriarchy to hate who they are. In their mind, trans men are just more women who are victims of men, which is both transphobic and deeply, deeply condescending to trans men. And then non-binary people, again, TERFs just forget non-binary people exist at all. As far as they're concerned, non-binary people aren't even a thing. So yeah, that's the thing. Even the seemingly reasonable TERFs don't actually care about the safety of trans folks. Even they couldn't care less if a trans person ends up alone on the street. They couldn't care less if a trans woman gets assaulted in the bathroom or in a prison or anywhere. They don't care. Because as far as they're concerned, hey, not a woman's issue. Out of sight, out of mind, is their take on trans people. And again, they couch it in terms of protecting women. Women's safety. Women won't wish. But they're making very clear that they don't... They make it very clear that they don't actually see trans women as women. Even the ones who will be like, oh yeah, you're... I'll use she, her pronouns. But you're still not actually a woman. I still don't actually see you as a woman. I'll use he, him pronouns, but I still don't see you as a man. Even they make it clear that they don't actually respect trans people. They don't respect the views of trans people. And, like, again, like, they talk a lot about, listen to women. Why aren't women being listened to? Where's the sympathy for women? But for TERFs, it's a one-way street. They have no interest in listening to trans people. They don't want to hear trans people. Aside from the ones who agree with them, of course. The types of, the likes of fucking Buck Angel. They're fine listening to Buck Angel because Buck Angel licks their assholes and tells them how great and right and righteous they are. But if a trans person dares to disagree with them, TERFs have absolutely no time for that trans person. They don't want to hear it. They want that trans person to shut up and stay away. As far as they're concerned, trans people can weesht. Weesht, by the way, means just like be silent, be quiet. It's a Scottish slang. So TERFs want trans people to shut up, sit down, stay out of the way, and just, like, take whatever abuse they get with a smile. They have no interest in actually listening to trans people. Meanwhile, they demand that they be heard on everything. TERFs demand that every single demand that they have be heard, listened to, and obeyed without question. You'll sometimes see people ask why trans people won't compromise on certain issues. Why won't, maybe trans people can compromise on the, on sports issues, on the sports issue. We actually just not long ago got a great example of why that doesn't work. Utah. Like most states, Utah debated trans youth in youth sports, trans kids in youth sports. This wasn't professional sports. They were talking about youth sports, kids. They were talking about, should a trans girl be allowed to play on a girls' hockey team? It's that sort of thing. They debated for months. They brought in experts. They talked, they yelled, they laughed, they cried, they fell in love in the screenplay I'm writing about it. Months, and they came up with a compromise. All the sides came together and came up with a compromise, which was basically just create a commission that would decide on a case-by-case basis what division a trans kid would play in. Whether they would play with the girls' teams or the boys' teams. Wasn't perfect. No one was entirely satisfied because that's what happens with compromise. But it was a completely reasonable. Compromise. No one can argue that it was an unreasonable compromise. And the public was behind it. The Republican legislature, on the last day of the session, the very last moment, instead passed a bill that was just a blanket ban on trans kids competing in, their preferred division. Just a blanket bill on trans girls playing in girls divisions, girls leagues. They did this without telling anyone ahead of time that they were going to do it. So the public had no input on this. They just threw the months of debate and the compromise right out the window. The Republican governor of Utah vetoed it. Because even the Republican governor of Utah saw this bill and went, well, this is some bullshit. And he actually put out like a really good statement. Like, credit to the guy. He's a Republican, so I'm not going to agree with him on much. But the statement he put out about explaining his veto was phenomenal. One thing he pointed out is 75,000 kids in youth sports in Utah. 4 of them are trans. 1 of them is a trans girl. Utah Republicans passed a bill targeting this one girl. This was after a compromise had been reached. So, why aren't trans people willing to compromise? Who are they, because the people they're because the people who they're arguing with aren't willing to compromise. When trans people do compromise, it ends up costing them. They get punished for compromising. So, you look at other things, women's shelters. What's the compromise on trans women being banned from women's shelters? Where are they supposed to compromise on that? Where are they supposed to compromise on what bathroom they get to use? Where are they supposed to compromise on so many of these things? There is no compromise to be had because the other side just wants them to suffer. The other side just wants to make their lives hard. The other side just wants to basically get rid of the existence of trans people. They want to try to legislate trans people out of existence. That's why they pass bills that are that's why they're trying to block any sort of, youth transition care. That's why a couple of states have passed bills that, there's Texas, and I think there's one other state that passed bills criminalizing support of trans youth. Just straight up calling it child abuse. Calling anyone who wants to acknowledge that trans kids can be trans, calling them groomers. Which they're also now starting to do with people who oppose anti-gay legislation as well, because the people who hate trans people, a lot of the people who hate trans folks also hate gay folks, and want to push back against the rights that gay people have gained. Note for those in the U.S. Note for gay people in the U.S. Transphobes in the U.S. Same-sex marriage is not safe right now. Republicans are gunning for same-sex marriage. Just so you know. Just so that you're aware. Those of you who claim to support gay rights, but who oppose trans rights, you are on the same side as the people who will be coming for same-sex marriage. Just be aware of that. So yeah, like I said, very glad I live in Canada where I don't have to worry about most of this shit. I'll always have like I said, Canada does have turfs. Canada does have people who want to ban trans women from existing in public. But they're they seem to be a lot less powerful here than they are in a lot of other countries. And I am very, very happy for that. And yeah. But it's why vigilance is important. Um, it's why we need to keep fighting, and it's why existing as trans is a revolutionary act. It is an act of rebellion. And I'm looking forward to joining that. And I'm looking forward to joining that rebellion, honestly. Yeah, the other day when my friend mentioned that she was pretty sure that hormones in Canada are free, the thought that went through my head is, holy shit, this can be as real as I want it to be, and doesn't have to be hard. And so yeah, I'm honestly really looking forward to going on this journey. And thank you to those of you who are going to be supporting me on my journey. And to those of you who are going to be trying to troll me and oppose me, yeah, bite my ass. But for now, thanks for watching, and have a nice night.